Hey, this is Chris with Phoenix Gaming. Today we're going to talk about trenches and turbines. Before we do, I do want to acknowledge I did forget to post my episode 4 of the Night Stalker series for Firefight. I apologize. It is recorded, it is edited, it is just not posted. I'll try to get that up also before I leave for Florida, but we do leave within the next roughly 12 hours, so there's a good chance that that doesn't happen. So you'll get 5 and then 4. I am sorry. Now let's dig in. This is going to be a quick video. I'm not going to dive into a bunch of announcements and all the other stuff. There's not going to be any ad. We're just getting right in. Trenches and turbines. It's going to be, and it is, a tabletop war game based loosely on the universal rule set called Hounds of War. If you don't know what Hounds of War is, it's a D10 based war game system that implements a points buy for different abilities or weapons, etc. And you use those to create custom rules for any miniature you want. So what you could do is you could grab a Space Marine, for example, or an Enforcer, and you could say, okay, this Space Marine should have good armor. We're going to set his armor here. This is how many points it is. We're going to set the attacks for the bolt gun here. This is how many points it is. And you just build a bear your Space Marine or your Enforcer or whatever model you want in an effort to create an army out of whatever existing miniatures you have. It's a great rule set for those that like things like Wargames Atlantic, where they have a lot of different miniatures, but they might not necessarily have a lot of rules that support them. But again, this is very loosely based on it. It's simply a starting point for the game. And then I changed and tweaked things as we went because there were certain aspects of Hounds of War that I didn't feel fit what I was trying to accomplish for this game, Trenches and Turbines. It eschews overarching army-wide rules in favor of USRs, and what I mean by that is there's no because you're an orc, you get this, X, Y, and Z, and nobody else gets it. And I know some people like that flavor, and some people don't. I prefer USRs because, one, I find them to be a bit more balanced. Two, you can use USRs in volume to create these different scenarios or different ways that the armies interact. So, again, taking that example for an orc, I might give it something to make it tougher or more durable, some sort of universal special rule, and maybe they have access to it army-wide. All the orcs might get some sort of feel no pain, for example, to make them tougher. Now, that doesn't mean other armies can't get access to that same feel no pain. It simply means that because you're an orc, you get it. And what that does is it creates a lot less room for rules to get abused because everybody has access to the same rules. And it also creates more balance because everybody has access to the same rules. And it creates a new challenge, a new opportunity to create uniqueness through these different rules. So, if we look at Space Marines, for example, using that same example from earlier, we know that a Space Marine would probably have extra hit points compared to a human. And we know that a Space Marine would probably have better armor when compared to a human. So we can do things like that as well. Work on the data sheet itself to create that uniqueness and that flavor in the army. Rather than everybody just move 6 because you're all just people, we could say, okay, well, maybe elves move 7, but they have something to counteract that. Kind of think of it like almost like old Dungeons and Dragons, where humans were the standard, which is kind of how most games are. But then if you're an elf, you might get extra speed, but maybe you lose something on the endurance side, on the constitution side. I'm not saying that's exactly how this is going to work. I'm just giving you an idea as to why I prefer USRs and how you can manipulate these things to still create balance. I am considering making it a points-free game. That's going to be kind of a tough one to do. Honestly, if it picks up, which I think it could potentially get a decent audience, I would probably still have to do some sort of points-based system just because if you wanted to do any kind of event or tournament, you would need something to create balanced forces. But what I would like to do is create kind of like detachments where you have this force organization. So you and I might play a company level game. And in a company level game, each army will outline what you bring in a company. It would be very restrictive in terms of force organization, which I know is a turnoff for some, but this is a war game. This is not a strategy game. So there's going to be a bit more restriction in things like that. So that's the ultimate goal, is to create some sort of system where you say, okay, well, you're going to take this company, I'm going to take a company, and then we kind of smash. But it may not work out that way. I do have the point system worked up. It is going to be fine. I just need to figure out exactly how I'm going to implement everything, and if I'm going to be able to get some sort of no points system to work. The setting is, I know, I thought I told it to add that. The setting of Trenches and Turbines, and we're going to talk about it from both a technological standpoint and a little bit about what it is. It's going to feature a variety of anachronistic and fantastic elements. And like I said before, it's kind of a World War I setting. You're going to have trenches, right? And so a good example of what I mean by this is if we look at the two armies I've started working on already, you have the Armicans, which are going to be a tech-heavy faction that rely on rapid insertion via transports, smaller and faster tanks, and lightning-fast airship strikes. So you're going to have airships, but they're not going to be, realistic kind of blimps. They're going to fall more in line with that kind of steampunk, diesel punk concept of an airship. So you're going to have these airship transports that can do air assault attacks on their opponents. So you're going to fly them down the table, and then you'll have troops that can get out and still do what they need to do, things like that. You're going to have and all the tanks are going to be fairly simple and straightforward. They're not going to be like a Sherman or things along those lines. They're going to be more in line with what you would have seen in World War I. So, they're going to be a little simpler. They're not going to have a million guns on them. A lot of them are going to have maybe one or two guns, and that's going to be it. You're going to have simple tanks that rely on speed and maneuverability rather than firepower. So what I mean by that is you're going to have smaller chassis, kind of like the Fiat, the old Fiat tank and the Ford tank that were used, or the Renault, I should say, in World War I. I think Ford also made one. But anyway, you're going to have those smaller kind of tanks where you just have a single turret and maybe it has 360-degree view, but it's a smaller gun because it's a smaller tank and it's relying on going fast rather than hitting hard. And what you're going to want to do with these smaller tanks is you're going to want to maybe flank some of the bigger tanks or get that behind them into their rear armor, because I do intend on having armor facings for tanks. Probably only tanks, we will see. I don't know. But you're going to have simple tanks that rely on speed and maneuverability rather than firepower. You're going to have an army that doesn't like the occult. So you're not going to have any kind of magic or kind of supernatural elements to this army. It's going to be very much we believe in technology. We believe in using the tools of the trade in the most advanced way we can. You'll see maybe some smaller, faster walker type units, kind of like a Iron Harvest kind of thing. They use their speed and positioning to flank opponents. So it's going to be a lot of, this army specifically is going to be a lot of bodies, like troops, infantry. Your tanks are going to be smaller. They're going to be lighter. They're going to be faster. You're going to rely on transports to get you in and out of places. And it's going to be a technical army. But you're going to have also an army where they're a short to mid-range army, meaning you're going to maybe have a lot of shorter range weapons, but weapons that also can be used effectively in melee, like a pistol or maybe some sort of smaller submachine gun, which I know isn't really World War I, but remember I said there's anachronistic elements to this game. So you're going to have that type of interaction where you have this army that's a little bit shorter range, but your base infantry are going to be trained in both hand-to-hand combat and range combat, so they're a little bit more universal in how they interact. The Devlet army, however, will be a more traditional army, and I use the word traditional in regard to the setting of this game. So they're going to be keeping their old ways, their traditions, and they're going to prefer power over finesse. The tanks are going to be much larger, less maneuverable, but they're going to have much stronger cannons. You know, so you're going to see those big, I can't think of what they're called, but the big British tanks that you saw earlier. The name escapes me, but I'm sure somebody can tell me in the comments. But the really massive ones, you know, you're going to have longer range rifles, but they're going to be used to support dedicated melee units for a combined arms experience. So you might have, you know, these riflemen who are carrying bolt action rifles and maybe some bayonets, but they're not going to be as proficient in melee as maybe the cavalry that you bring that have swords and rifles or swords and pistols or whatever. So you're going to have a more specialized unit experience for a combined arms experience with this army. And then they would much rather implement the uncertainty of magic than let go of traditions and embrace newer technology. So you might get some sort of, and I'm still working all of this out, but you might get some sort of wizard unit or some sort of caster unit or something like that, or some sort of supernatural element to this army, regardless of what it is. I haven't done all the army work yet. I've got base units so that I can make sure core rules work, and now I'm starting to fill out some of the extra stuff. I would describe this army Devlet as a middle ground between being tech and being occult. Like they have a little bit of both. Whereas there's an army one of my buddies is working on for a campaign, which we'll touch on in a minute, that's going to be much more occult and much lower tech. So it'll be kind of neat to see how that all interacts. Some of the gameplay features, and again, this is something I've already play tested a little bit. It's only been like very basic infantry versus infantry, but at least I know the core rules work. Card-based initiative and activations. This has been my favorite method for unit activation for a lot of reasons. And when I say card-based, it's numbered cards, not unit cards. And a good way to think about that is unit cards would be like Conquest, where you get one card for your units, right? So if you have, and I don't know any of the Conquest units off the top of my head, but let's say you had 5 rifle squads. You would put 5 rifle squad cards in your deck. Then if you had a lieutenant, you'd put a lieutenant card in your deck, and so on and so on. And you'd shuffle it up, and then when you drew one, you could activate any of the unactivated units of that name. So if you had 5 rifle squads, when you draw a rifle squad, you can activate any unactivated rifle squad. And that's how unit cards would activate. When I say number cards, we total the number of units. So you're going to say, okay, I've got 8 units, and I'm going to say, okay, I've got 10 units. So we get 18 cards. And we shuffle them up, and then you'll get 8 of them, and I'll get 10 of them. And then we'll assign them in the order we want them to activate by placing them face down next to a unit. So if I have number 1, I put it next to whatever I want to go first. And then if you had number 18, like that would go next to whatever you think could go last. This has been my favorite activation system. I've played multiple games that use it. Hounds of War uses it. This Quars War, the 28mm battle game, uses it. And the reason I like it is because it gives a lot of strategic depth. It's not simply an I activate, you activate. There's some planning that has to go into it. And that's not to say there's no planning that goes into alternating activations. There is. It's just a different type of planning. And you can set things up really well with card activations. It's an interesting thing where you can say, okay, I can look at the cards I have, and then I know what you have, and then it's what are you going to activate? Is there one thing that's super obvious? If there is, then I already know where I don't need to activate. For example, if you have a unit and it's about to get charged, you might activate that unit first if you have number 1 so that you can shoot at the charging unit. And if I already know that, I'm not going to worry about activating that charging unit early because I'm going to assume you're going to shoot them. And if you don't shoot them, that's hooray for me, right? So there's that level of strategy in it in terms of understanding your opponent and the game, etc. USRs, like I said, but that's going to be for both units and terrain. So the universal special rules will help keep units balanced, but I will do my best to give armies a very distinct flavor. So it doesn't just feel like we're playing with green-skinned humans if you're orcs, for example, or shorter humans if you're dwarves. Like, I will do my best to make armies feel distinct. And then USRs for terrain. And I'm a huge advocate for this. I've talked to firefight communities about it. I think it's one of the best things you can do for terrain. And the reason is because, one, it allows for a variety of terrain to be used, but also for you to understand what all the terrain does. If you've got woods, and I say, okay, all woods has cover, and then all woods has concealment, and then all woods have difficult ground, we can just look at those rules, look them up, and go, okay, this is what this feature does. 9th edition 40K used this similar system, and it was the best terrain system. I'm not even joking. It's the best terrain system I've used so far, because it allows you as a player to also just make your own features. If you're playing a narrative game and you're like, okay, I have this really cool feature that I don't really have rules for, you and your opponent can go, okay, well, let's pick some keywords, let's give it some keywords, and then we can just play our game. There's no fiddling about, there's no messing about. It's very quick, it's very easy, and once you learn all those keywords, it goes fast. And you don't even need to learn them if you just have a cheat sheet. The goal for the game is to be a middle ground between depth and speed. It will play fast. I mean, there's no wound rolls like in 40K, things like that. And when you just have hit rolls, damage dice, things go a little faster anyway. So it will play fast. It will go kind of fast, but I don't want for it to be shallow. I don't want it to just be a 50-50 die roll of just like, ha ha ha, pick up models. The game ultimately is going to be outsmarting your opponent rather than simply shooting them off the table. And that's where the card activations are going to come in, things like that. Units on average are going to hit 50% of the time or less. And this is intentional. You know, if you're rolling a unit of 10 riflemen and they hit on, and remember it's a D10 system, so let's say they hit on 5s, which I don't think, it's 6s. Let's say they hit on 6s. That's a 50% hit rate. You might have some sort of modifier like cover to make it 5s. Now, if you've got a 10 model squad, you're going to hit 4 times. You know, it's one of those where you've got this interaction where the goal isn't to necessarily delete your opponent or pick up whole units every time you shoot, because that's not how real battle works. And I don't think this is going to be a real battle simulator, but I don't want it to feel like it's just like I roll dice, you pick up a unit, you roll dice, I pick up a unit. So again, this is intentional. It's going to be more about positioning than it is about model removal, but model removal will still be important. Keep that in mind. I am running a playtest campaign as soon as I get back from Florida. I'm going to be using Armikins. Izzy will be using Devlet, my daughter. And then the 2 players that I have that are not Izzy or me are working on their own factions with me. We're going to build them together, and we're going to kind of flesh them out and make them see how they work. It's going to be a map campaign. We're going to be fighting over an area of the map. I'll have maps posted, all this stuff. And I think they might actually just be in the rules, which, like I said, I'm going to put in the description. I'll put a link to the doc in there, or at least a PDF, so that if you want to look through them, you can. Just keep in mind, it is not the finished product. It is, I haven't redone the terrain rules. There's a couple things I need to fix. There's a lot of things going on in there, but feel free, read through it. If you've got some questions, comments, critiques, let me know. The Army rules will probably not be in there just yet, but the core rules will be there. I do look forward, like I said, to sharing it with everybody. If you're in the Discord, there's a set of rules and map, and everything's in the Discord. But I'm not gonna put everything in the YouTube channel. I'll just throw a link to the core rules in the YouTube channel, and then as things kind of build out, I'll keep sharing and keep sharing. So just keep in mind, it's a rough draft. I appreciate everybody kind of hanging out with me for a little bit while I talk about this. I wanted to share it before I went to Florida. When I get back from Florida, I will be working on some how to build videos. We're going to look at how to build stalkers, crawlers, rats, because as much as I love Mantic, one of the things that I don't love is that some of their stuff just doesn't have instructions, so you have to dig. And most of it isn't too hard. But if you've never built a model before, that could be very intimidating. It could be very daunting to buy a box of miniatures. It doesn't have instructions, and you're just like, yeah, I guess. So I'm going to post some videos on that. We'll get that going as well. So thanks a lot. I hope everybody has a great weekend. I'll see everybody in a couple weeks. I'll try not to get too sunburned while I'm in Florida. Thanks.